Anatomical landmarks and introduction to supporting areas. Now, when I studied anatomical landmarks for the first time, it was beyond me. No matter how many times I read it, I would always forget it the next day. I just couldn't understand why uh, the the maxillary bone is a supporting area, but the mandibular crest of the alveolar ridge is not the supporting area. I couldn't understand why the slopes of the mandibular ridge are supporting area, but the crest is not. There was so many confusions in my mind, and I just couldn't remember any of it. So my main objective out of these videos is to help you understand the anatomy of all the structures that are present in the oral cavity. As you may recall, the dictum hypothesis. The aim of a prosthodontist is not only the meticulous replacement of what is missing, but the preservation of what is remaining. When you're constructing a denture, you think that it should be able to cover the maximum possible area and get the maximum possible retention and support. At the same time, being in harmony with the structures that are supporting it and surrounding it. And this is where the knowledge of your anatomical landmarks comes into play. It's very important for you to understand, right from taking an impression, what structures you have to completely cover to provide retention, what structures will be able to support your denture, from fabricating a special tray, even maintaining a peripheral seal, from your trine. All of these require you to understand anatomical landmarks in detail. There are three types of anatomical landmarks, which are the supporting structures, the limiting structures, and the relief areas. The structures that can support the bear of the dentures, the structures that limit the extent of the denture, and the structures that need to be relieved when you're making a denture. Let's start with the supporting structures first. Now, those areas of the maxillary and mandibular edentulous ridges that are considered best suited to carry the forces of mastication when the dentures are in function. In short, the areas of the maxillary and mandibular arch that will support the denture. Ideal requirement out of them is to be relatively resistant to remodeling and resorptive changes. What makes the anatomy of supporting structures ideal? So there are three basic points that we keep in mind when we think of supporting structures. One being the underlying bone. In the maxillary denture, the underlying bone is the palatine process of the maxilla and the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. And in the mandibular denture, it is the mandible itself. The second thing is the mucosa, and the third thing is the submucosa, coming to the underlying bone. Now, the bone may be compact or it may be cancellous, and this is where clears my own first doubt. The crest of the mandibular ridge is composed of cancellous bone, whereas the crest of the maxillary ridge is composed of the compact bone. Just show you an image. This is not how the maxillary or mandibular ridges look, but you can see the difference between the cancellous bone and the compact bone. The cancellous bone is less mineralized, so the effects of bone resorption are more pronounced, which is why we prefer compact bone to give a better support. This is why the crest of the mandibular ridge is not a supporting structure, whereas the crest of the maxillary ridge is a supporting structure, but not a primary supporting structure. It's a secondary supporting structure because it is still prone to resorption. Coming to the mucous membrane. Now, you know that the entire oral cavity is lined by a soft tissue, which is the mucous membrane, on which the denture base rests. Now, this mucous membrane serves as a cushion between the denture base and the supporting bone. So you have the bone, the mucous membrane, and the denture. This is why it's very important for your mucous membrane to be able to support it well. And how? First of all, the mucous membrane is composed of the mucosa and the submucosa. The mucosa and the submucosa. The mucosa is of three types, as we know. It's masticatory, lining, and specialized. In support bearing areas, we prefer a masticatory mucosa which is firmly attached. And a submucosa should be thick. So submucosa is made up of connective tissue, dense to loose alveolar. Submucosa should consist of resilient, fibrous connective tissues and should be firmly attached. Example being the anterolateral part of the palate with abundant adipose tissue and the posterolateral part of the palate containing abundant glandular tissue. So we require the mucosa to be keratinized and the submucosa to be thick, fibrous and resilient and firmly attached. So with this knowledge that we have, the supporting structures are in the mandibular and the maxillary ridges are in the maxilla. The primary is the hard palate and the posterolateral slopes of the residual alveolar ridge, and the secondary are the rugae and the maxillary tuberosity. And you can see it here as well. You have the rugae, tuberosity, anterolateral zone of the hard palate and the posterolateral zone of the hard palate. And in the mandible, you have the buccal shelf area and the slope of the residual alveolar ridge. Now, I don't have a diagram here, but let's go here. Okay, anyways, the crest is actually composed of the cancellous bone, whereas the slopes have a thin plate of cortical bone. So this is why they can be secondary stress bearing areas, but then again they are at an acute angle to the masticatory forces, which is why they're not that preferred as compared to your buccal shelf area. Now that you know the three key points, a compact bone, a keratinized mucosa and a thick submucosa, we can go on to study all the support bearing areas in much greater detail in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you learned something out of this lecture. Thank you.